I could just ask you, I'm a little sensitive on the time. We do have another panel, and Ms. Falls would like her to testify too. So if you could move on. And one of the issues that I'm hoping that you were planning to talk about it is the the current status of current safety oversight. You've been very thorough in terms of jurisdictional areas, but to see what you're currently doing. And I'm just reminded, one on the annual rail safety report from last November, where it talks about, similar to the natural gas infrastructure, this is regarding railroad bridges, similar to the natural gas infrastructure, it is unclear if the railroads are able to adequately identify with a high degree of certainty the year, model, construction materials, and maximum weight the bridge can carry, as well as maintenance programs and practices. So that's kind of one of the areas that I'd like to see how the PUC is looking at information that you've already had, that you've identified, and what currently is being done to, here again, the oversight of some of these issues that have come about and the current safety issues that may be prevalent, especially related to now with the oil transport.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I could just add on, in my district, which includes Benicia and all the capital corridors going all the way to Sacramento, the concern is the type of oil, the crude, the type of crude, the frequency and the condition of both the equipment and the tracks. So what I'd like to ask you about is whether you, with your credible record and knowledge, are concerned about any of these items, and if the state has any jurisdiction to improve the condition of any of those items.
And, Doctor, I do also want to give you an opportunity you do have the last page of your report, which I think gets at the kind of the heart of some of the topic here today, too. So I want to give you an opportunity to do that as well.
Okay, let me try to jump right to it. So what can we do? And I think the two areas that, well, the main area is really we enforce the federal regulations, which fairly well cover the issue of rail safety, with the exceptions I've mentioned. And those are very relevant. Tank car safety and the wear on the track, the wear on the cars, those are all going to increase. And we're looking at all the data on that now. To the extent that those increase, given right now we're having a hard time meeting even the inspection mandates that we have now for a couple of reasons. To the extent that that's an increase, to me it's a metric of risk. Now these are low consequence or high consequence, low probability accidents that are extremely hard to predict. I don't personally see any comfort in the fact that they happen in Canada or Maine or anything. The probability of a derailment is what it is. The probability of a tank car being in that derailment is what it is, and it's almost extremely impossible to predict. So anyway, to the extent that there'll be more inspections needed of the tank cars, there'll be more trains, and the extent that there is more tonnage running across track, track wear is a function of the tonnage that runs across it. And this will be a huge increase in annual tonnage. To the extent that that's happening, I think we are positioned well if we have the resources to address the primary risks that are here to prevent a derailment. Once it derails, it's pretty much out of our hands. We're looking at, I know the railroad shares the same problem of retirements. We're having, right now with the boomers retiring, there's a loss of institutional knowledge. The PUC also has problems with retention and recruitment. Our pay scales are 30 to 40% lower than the same job at the FRA, so our folks leave, and unfortunately, most of the time they're going to other states. One even went to Canada for a higher level of pay, and of course the industry will pay more as well. The other concern, though, is training and lead time. I mean, it takes a year to certify, and we do have a concern about training for across the board for inspectors and maintenance folks, even on the railroad, to be able to maintain track well. So that gets me through my page. You want to talk about bridges. I do have to give credit to our program manager, who's not here. He's on vacation. It's a rare thing for him to do, but he started looking at the bridges before the Lech-Meganic accident because he had a concern about bridges. I believe he had been watching. Since San Bruno, we all have the mandate now to look beyond the regulations. It's not just the regulations. It's what risks are there, period. It's the safety management system. What can go wrong, you need to find out. The mantra we have is, well, some people are trying to figure out how it will work. We're always trying to figure out how it'll fail. And bridges seemed like a candidate that needed our research. We're not, I can't give you strong conclusions right now, except that we're learning. We have one risk assessment engineer for the railroad section, engineering, a specialist. And he's working with the staff, with the inspectors, the folks that have the institutional knowledge on the ground. He's working with them to get up to speed. We're starting to look at bridges. We appreciate the cooperation. In particular, I went out with Union Pacific staff to see how they go through it. But that, yes, that is a concern. The weight of these trains is, yes, they're short trains, they're short, heavy trains that can put a lot of weight on any particular bridge element. And then the rest of it is, it simply is how an accident can be caused for any one of those, in any one of those areas, and how well are we doing a job in each one of those. I would say that probably most importantly, we would be looking at track and car equipment. The accidents, the first few pages I showed 11 accidents. My count of it was 6 of those, and some of them were preliminary, but 6 of those were track caused. 2 were either car or track caused. 2 were car caused. And the Canadian one, you have to consider human factors operating practices. So it's, and I do have to say, the railroads have been investing in infrastructure. I mean, we need to give credit where it's due. We have seen a huge decline in accidents from the 70s. And the 2 things that I know that parallel that are deregulation and economic health of the railroads, economic deregulation, not safety deregulation, because the FRA since 1970 has implemented its Federal Railroad Safety Act, and since California, starting in 1981 when I first came to the PUC, has started hiring its own federal inspectors. We started with 1 in 81, now we're up to about, I think, 38.
I have one question, and then I have a number of questions, but I'd like one, then let Ms. Falls talk and make her presentation, and then we can maybe go back and forth on a couple of questions. The one was the PUC code section 765.5 tells the CPUC kind of how the legislature wants rail inspections to be done, and in it we can see an evolution of an understanding as it's changed and moved forward. In 1990, the legislature specified that all rail yards be inspected once every 120 days, that rails must be inspected once a year. In 2006, the legislature required that the CPUC use a risk-based focus on those inspections. A few years ago, after the independent review panel for the PUC, it called for greater risk assessment work for pipeline safety, and the CPUC asked for and was granted positions for rail risk assessment. Could you tell me about some of the work that that unit has been doing?
Right. For the rail, it was one person, because we had one person for rail crossings, one person for rail transit, and one person for rail roads. And, of course, the funding is an issue there as well. That person has been right in the middle of the bridge stuff. He's been, when we hire somebody, they don't necessarily have the bridge expertise, but he's a very experienced and highly qualified engineer who's learning the railroad. He's working with our staff. Risk assessment right now, it seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. We are still concerned about train makeup on these mountain grades around through Cantera, so he's also getting up to speed on track train dynamics, which is a complex topic. We have in the pipeline also doing what we can, what we think we should do to make sure that earthquake safety And the early warning, I think Senator Padilla passed last year a bill on early warning technology. We'd like to see if we can facilitate that. We're trying to interface with the gas folks on common training. Safety management system has a lot of common elements and themes, so we're looking forward to getting some formal training there as well. But we're admittedly in the infancy on this. We're attacking some low-hanging fruit, and we hope to become proficient in the ultimate SMS, or risk management, and that is comprehensive look at what all possible hazards there are, the likelihood of each.
Do you have any specific thoughts on how, based on the kind of the evolution and certainly the increased usage of the system and the number of trains that will be coming through, on what the next steps would be and how to approach inspections for rail safety as we move forward with this new dynamics that we're seeing in California?
We may be able to formalize what we've been doing informally, and for example, we may not have met the track inspection mandates to look at every mile of track in the state a few years. Now, part of that, but not all of that, but part of that is likely that we're looking at some areas twice based on risk. We've had focused inspections. I know that we've looked more closely at a route like Tehachapi, which has probably some of the heaviest mountain grade train volumes. We might be able to formalize that to have it be more risk-based about where we can most efficiently put our inspectors. That's definitely something we'd like to do.
Okay, very good. Senator Walker. Very good. Thank you very much, Doctor, and we may have some questions before we're finished. Ms. Falls, thank you very much for being here today and for your testimony.
Thanks. I assure you this is short. Thank you, Senator Hill and members of the committee, for the opportunity to report to you on Caltrans's responsibility for safety inspection of in-service bridges. My name is Dolores Valls, and I am the State Bridge Maintenance Engineer for Caltrans. I'm here on behalf of Malcolm Doherty, the Director of the Department of Transportation. Our network of bridges is crucial to the safety, economic prosperity, and mobility of California. As a State Bridge Maintenance Engineer, I'm responsible for directing the activities of the Caltrans Structure Maintenance and Investigations Unit, which is charged with ensuring the safety and reliability of the California's bridge inventory. There are more than 26,000 state, highway, city, and county bridges in California. Each of those bridges undergoes regularly scheduled inspections by trained and experienced civil engineers with an expertise in bridges. All 50 states are required by a federal mandate to perform bridge inspections and report the findings from those inspections in a report at regular intervals for all public road bridges. The department has a state budget authority to use state resources to perform bridge inspections, which is 100% federally reimbursed. The Federal Highway Administration sets the national bridge inspection standards that Caltrans follows. During every bridge inspection, Caltrans engineers look for any signs of distress that could compromise the structural integrity of the bridge. We have 110 trained engineers devoted to field inspection of bridges. These inspections are performed in two-person teams. The inspection teams assess the structural condition of each bridge, looking for any indications of potential problems. They examine the bridge deck, the riding surface, looking for cracks or other signs of distress, and evaluate its condition. The same process is followed on the superstructure, which are the structural members that support the deck, and the substructure, the bridge support elements or foundations of a bridge. These are visual inspections unless the distressed condition requires a more in-depth inspection or material tests or an engineering analysis. To ensure the safety of the inspection teams whenever they are near or over a railroad track, Caltrans coordinates with the railroad by applying for permits to inspect railroad bridges and requests and pays for railroad flaggers. Of our more than 26,000 bridges in California, only a relatively small fraction, approximately 1,800, cross paths with commercial railroad lines. Half of these are state-owned bridges, which Caltrans is responsible for inspecting typically every 2 years. The remaining bridges are owned by cities, counties, and other governmental agencies and are located off the state highway system. Caltrans is responsible and performs the same bridge inspection for local bridges that cross over railroads. The inspection reports for these local bridges are transmitted to the local agency bridge owners. For bridges that carry railroads over a roadway, the national standards do not require Caltrans to perform the same bridge inspections. For these bridges, Caltrans is only responsible for transmitting location and clearance data to the Federal Highway Administration. However, it is Caltrans' practice and policy to also inspect the supports and the foundations that are located within state right-of-way or near a public roadway in consideration of the safety of the traveling public. In addition to state and locally owned bridges, Caltrans also inspects and maintains portions of supports or foundations of approximately 60 bridges owned by the railroads per signed maintenance agreements with railroad companies. Caltrans has no authority over how railroads operate or how the railroads maintain their bridges. Our responsibility involving the inspection of bridges carrying railroads over state highways is limited and clearly defined. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you this information on the Caltrans Bridge Inspection Program.
You
and I'd
were
be
right.
happy to answer any questions.
That was brief. That's very good. Senator Wolf, do you have a question? A couple questions, if I could. You've talked about what's involved in the inspection and how it works. And are you using, obviously these are based on federal standards, are they the best practices? Would you have or know of a better way to inspect them or a more thorough way than the federal practices that are
I can assure you the federal standards as well as our practices are very thorough. There are approximately 95 different data pieces of information that we collect on every bridge.
So there's nothing else you would suggest obtaining or doing?
And this is on bridges open to the motoring public. Again, on the railroad bridges, we do not inspect the top deck where the railroad tracks are. It's private property.
Does anyone inspect those?
I don't know.
Does the
railroads do, and this is what we're trying to gear up to do as well. There's one federal inspector for about 10 or 11 states, including California.
And it's his responsibility to look at the track on the top of on the railroad deck?
Well, our track inspectors would look at the track itself, the rails, the ties, and the subgrade ballast and so forth. But the actual bridge structure underneath that,
I see,
is what we're talking about.
And your inspection does not cover the deck or underneath
bridges
the track?
that are solely with a deck, railroad on the deck, that's considered, our agreements are for the bearings down. So the supports to a bridge is what our responsibility is. The railroads own the bridge, and it's their responsibility.
Would that include a collapse of where the train goes over the bridge, or if it's a trestle, whatever it is, and then if the structure on the sides could be holding it up, but the center could collapse because of some problems underneath the track and the deck?
Well, our practice is to inspect those walls or those supports. Again, especially obviously our interest is the safety of the motoring public, but if anything can fall within a roadway, we would inspect those.
Go ahead, Senator Wolf.
Do you have any you heard the initial concerns that were raised about the nature of the material and the increasing frequency and the weight, etc. Do you have any concerns about that with respect to the bridges that you inspect?
Well, the California bridges, especially state-owned bridges, are designed using a certain weight and loading from the railroads. We do have some bridges in California that are multi-use. They have rail lines as well as open to traffic, highway traffic, dual use. As far as I know, our designs are based on a maximum loading that we're aware of, the E60 Cooper loading. If these new rail cars exceed that weight, which I'm not aware of and we have not been contacted, then I would have a concern.
And do we know whether the weight will exceed the load limits?
Union Pacific, I think, would be able to speak to that very well. Dave Wickersham here. But these cars are not, this weight is not a new weight. Grain trains have run these weights. So it's not new, it's just the frequency of them that is a concern. I have seen printouts showing maximum weights allowable on routes. And I think all the routes into California, again, Dave can talk about this, exceed the weight of what the oil trains will have per car, the per car weight.
Thank you.
If you were to inspect a bridge, I don't say if there's an average type of bridge or an average size, what is involved in that in terms of time? Would the inspector look at that? It does not look at data other than the visual inspection, I guess, is what we're talking about. And we're talking about railroad bridge under the agreement with the railroads.
The agreement with the railroads, again, would be just for the foundations, the substructure. Depending on the size, there really isn't an average, but it would typically take about an hour to do an inspection just of the foundations, substructure. And there's additional time for access to get to the bridges, et cetera, but about an hour on site.
Okay.
There are larger bridges, of course. Some of the larger would take longer time.
Sure. I would imagine. If you were to look, are there bridge inspection plans that are in place in locations where there would be a bridge inspection plan? What would you need to know or say whether it was a good plan or if it was a bad plan? If someone were to plan a bridge inspection or have a plan for that, what would you put in a good one?
A good plan would be a complete plan. It would be all the elements of the bridge and actually doing an assessment of all the elements of the bridge, not a generalization, but actually observing where the cracks are, where the settlement is, and I would expect plans to have what would occur if something is found. If this is found, then this, or the responsibility of who would take care of the problem, et cetera.
And then on that plan, you would have a baseline that then you could look at the next plan, the next inspection to see if those cracks have grown or...
It's our practice to take along the last inspection report and to see if whatever repairs were recommended, that they were completed and move, the new report from there.
Okay. And, I'm hearing, we got the bridge inspections that Caltrans conducts, and then there's what the CPUC is. Maybe you could kind of run through what's the difference and which bridges and what you look at, and then what bridges Caltrans looks at and what the PUC is, and where's that jurisdictional boundary, and what are the things that you're looking at?
Well, the bridges that probably the largest difference is that the bridges that we would look at any railroad bridge, and Caltrans would look at just those that affect roadways.
Those that what? Sorry.
Affect roadways.
Over or under.
Motor vehicle, over or under roadway. But there's plenty out there that don't, and those are, would be exclusively inspected by the railroad and that one federal inspector, and we're trying to gear up to get, I'm envious of the expertise that she has and the staffing, to gear up to where we have a confidence that we're looking at them sufficiently, with sufficient oversight.
And maybe if they pay more, you could steal them and they could come along. The other question in that is, so your inspections and also are those bridges that you do under contract or an agreement with the railroads are only that go over roadways, or does it cover just the ones that are involved in roadways?
Just the railroad bridges that go over the roadway. We would inspect the foundation, the substructure.
And
that basically is because we'd inspect it and actually maintain, because that's where the public traffic may damage it by impact or other. So
sure.
The agreement is we would inspect it and repair any damage made by motorists.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Another question, Dr. King. Thank you, Senator Wolf. Appreciate it. It seems that, well, first of all, I know that we've had a decrease in rail accidents since the 1970s, is my understanding. And, what has caused that? Is it, because of the better practices, better technologies, or a drop in volume of traffic? But it seems that we've done a better job since the 70s in terms of rail accidents. And then that'll lead to my next question.
Yeah.
And the final one.
I mentioned briefly earlier, but the things that happened along with that time, the two major things were economic deregulation. So railroads were able to refine their, if you will, business model better and target the kinds of shipments where they would be the most productive. Their financial well-being was horrible in the 70s, and now it's very good. They're making record profits these days. Every quarter they seem to break the last quarter's record. And to give them credit due, where credit's due, during the recession, they took advantage of the time with reduced traffic to go out and put a lot of money into infrastructure. And we've seen that on Donner Pass, for example, a lot of track renewal and elsewhere. At the same time, the federal government instituted its comprehensive rail safety inspection program, and all the regulations that I listed, those are all since that time as well. Those two happened in parallel, and the conclusion there for me is that they both work together to drop the record. Now, just one note on the graph that I presented at the commission showing that decrease. That was a subset of accidents for mainline. Those are the ones that I selected those basically because those are the ones most likely to result in a tank car breach, a mainline derailment or collision, as opposed to a slow speed yard derailment. But there still are the yard derailments.
Okay, thank you. Final question that I have is that the human factors seem to be making up a larger and larger share of rail accidents in California. This committee's subcommittee on gas and electric infrastructure safety had a hearing in November on improving the CPUC's safety oversight, and that Dr. Don Arndt from the FAA discussed human factors and said something to the effect that if you started an investigation and see a human factor, and then you end an investigation and find the cause to be a human factor, then you haven't really learned anything. Much of the evolution in safety management over the last couple of decades has been to get at the human factor problem and learn more about it and how best to deal with it. Can you give us any insight into what we've learned from these accidents caused by the human factors and what the PUC and the industry could do to use these insights in reducing human factor risks as we move forward?
Well, very quickly, I'd like to mention what I call a low-hanging fruit, and that is, for me, a very tangible thing of what safety culture is. Safety culture can just be another buzzword, but that's the close call reporting system. And I believe your staff may have attended a presentation by Linda Connell from NASA, who I've worked with a little bit over the years. But inspections will give you information about infrastructure. Observations will give you information about what's going on, but obviously when you're looking, people know you're looking, and you don't see exactly what's going on there. There may be shortcuts taken. I worked during the 70s, and it was a very weak safety cultures, and were a lot of shortcuts. In fact, you were supposed to get the work done using shortcuts. Close call reporting system is designed and been very successful with the Federal Aviation Administration, and now beginning with the Federal Railroad Administration, in getting at the kinds of near-miss data, 20 near misses for every accident, for example, getting at the near-miss data that gives you a better picture of the risks you have out there. Not only that you have better data, but you can also find out what's in the mind of people that had that near miss, whereas if there's an accident or fatality, you don't. That's just one program that I see is very encouraging for us, and I've been trying to facilitate that. I actually was on the working group with the Transit Rail Advisory Committee for Safety with the Federal Transit Administration. But And your question, remind me, I think I answered just one part.
More or less to define how we're dealing with the human factor aspect of accidents and how best that we can put insights to reduce the risk of that. I know, in Canada, they has required rail operators to implement safety management systems within their operations. So I didn't know if we were looking at something like that as well to eliminate that human factor.
Well, and that's what reminded me of the close call reporting system, because that's the best way you can find out what are the conditions that actually lead to human error, the design and so forth. The classic example was the TWA flight that ran into the mountain. It had almost happened a week before or sometime before, yet the pilots didn't report that they actually got into something that was completely confusing with the directions to the plane. So I'm actually an industrial organizational psychologist, so to me it's all human error. Even infrastructure is designed by humans. And it goes to the limitations and capacities of humans to operate a system. Information overload, misunderstandings, lack of training. I think if we put a lot of effort into the close call systems, I think we would get probably the best bang for our buck on human factors.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. King. Thank you for your testimony and for answering the questions. And Ms. Valls, thank you very much. Appreciate it so much. So, thank you.